Good morning, doctor. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Vanessa. It's nice to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us on Fast Keto. I have been wanting to get you on the show for a while now, and I'm so thrilled that you could be here. And you're coming to us from a beautiful part of the world, it looks like.
Yeah, I fortunately am able to spend a little bit of time down in the Dominican Republic on a nice, pretty beach. I want to make sure that everybody knows it's not really a vacation because I'm probably working more than I ever have. But it is nice to be somewhere and get some sunshine and be able to swim and things like that.
That's fantastic. Well, I love all of the work that you do. One of the things that first caught my attention, I would say, when I was on Twitter one day. I've been doing Instagram and YouTube and stuff for a while, but more recently got active on Twitter. And I saw you do this tweet, and it said, to all my former patients that I ever recommended, the standard American diet and all these medications to, I deeply apologize. And this is what I've learned. And this is, what I've applied in my own life. And I'm so passionate about this stuff now. And I was like, wow, like it gave me goosebumps, to see someone out there who was willing to just acknowledge that, they've been trained a certain way and this is what they've been taught to do. And yet you've had this personal discovery and you applied it in your own life. So I thought that was so cool when I saw that tweet.
Thank you. Yeah, that meant a lot to me too. So for any of you out there who are not exactly sure what Vanessa is talking about, I had a kind of a come to enlightenment moment where I realized that after 20 years practicing medicine, that I spent a lot of that time looking back at the dietary advice that I was giving people. I potentially could have caused damage to a lot of people in the fact that, I taught them to eat real food for the most part, but the metabolic disaster that was coming out of my mouth and everybody else's at the time to cut back on fat, eat more plant-based whole grain foods and more beans and legumes and things like this was just driving this whole metabolic disaster. So I made a public apology to that for anybody that any of my patients that were following me at the time. That I'm sorry that I kind of feel like I gave you some bad advice, and hopefully you're okay.
Yeah, I think it's so neat too that you personally made these changes in your life. So you are not just telling people to do this; you're actually walking the talk.
Yeah, well, so let me take you through, for our viewers here, a little bit of that story. So my background is, I was born and raised in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'll kind of fast track this. I ended up going to medical school on the West Coast in Portland, Oregon. Moved to Boulder, Colorado, where I did some residency work, then moved back to Charlotte and opened a practice. And my specialty has always been, and this comes from one of my mentors in medical school, Dr. Tori Hudson, who I just had an affinity for kind of female health and began to get interested in hormonal chemistry, and it led me for the majority of my practicing life was working with things like anything that would be related to perimenopause, menopause, thyroid dysfunctions, polycystic ovary syndromes, weight gain, all of these hormonally driven things that are particularly related to females. And so I enjoyed that work. I think my patients enjoy me. But what happened along the way is I became a disaster because and I look back at my family history now, and I was set up completely to be a insulin resistant on my way to type 2 diabetes. I was eating, it wasn't that I was eating bad food. It was the foods that I was eating, I could not get enough of them. I could sit down and eat a plate of pasta and think that I'm doing healthy by just drizzling some olive oil on it. That doesn't sound too bad, right? But I could eat pounds and pounds of pasta. I never got a signal that said that I'm full of this. I knew that I had to stop eating at some point, but I was driven with this whole looking back now of a disorder that I did not understand. So what happened about 5 years ago is I said that I cannot no longer do this. I had gotten up to close to 300 pounds practicing as a physician. And I said, there was a, I hope this doesn't offend anybody, but there was a come to Jesus moment where I knew that this is out of control and there's something that I don't know and I have got to figure it out. So my aha moment was the day that I thought, Jay, you probably know more about hormonal biochemistry than most physicians that you are colleagues with and know. Maybe the answer here has something to do in the hormonal world. So I started where a lot of people did, and I went after what's the biggest one I need to know more about, and it was called insulin. And I began to understand or dig into this and understand that what is happening here is that this energy balance between the foods that I eat and the hormonal response to them and directly through insulin was causing a energy storage problem. I was taking in way too much energy. The body didn't have any place to store it anymore except for in fat cells. My blood sugars were all out of balance. And I was on a way to disaster. So that was my first, so I began to look at, it's got to be more than that. So I began to study other hormones like glucagon and the roles that, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone play in this and how they function with the thyroid gland. So I began to build this map. And at the same time I was doing this for myself and I began to apply, what happens if I restrict the certain part of my diet that elicits this hormonal response and keep that hormone low, what happens? So I start just shredding body fat. And, as you all probably know, it does happen a little bit quicker in men usually than it does with women. But there's some reasons for that. We're going to get into some of that, of how to tweak that for yourself. But anyway, so started rapidly losing weight. And at the same time I was doing this, I began to look at how is this different between men and women? And how does this apply to my patients? Because I'm seeing a big, I'm seeing this over and over again that the patients that are now coming to see me even more and more after 15 or 20 years of practice are hitting that middle perimenopausal stage, moving towards menopause or have just now become menopausal. And what they consistently say is, I don't know where this extra 15, 20 pounds, whatever came from. What I do know is that what I used to be able to do to get rid of it is futile at best. It's not going anywhere. And so I began to take what I'm learning in my own life and begin to look at how to apply this for this subset of women who are having this issue and begin to find that there is a particular pattern. And there's a particular thing that needs to happen. There's a particular set of hormones that need to be accounted for and balanced. But yet it does start with, you do need to go on a low carbohydrate diet. You've got to get your insulin levels down first and foremost, and then there's some other tweaking that we can do. So is that making sense so far?
Absolutely. And I think you just nailed it right there, hit the nail on the head when you talked about the endocrine aspects of weight loss and fat loss, because to me, that's what's been so amazing about the keto and low carb space is we've always traditionally or typically focused on this energy balance of calories in versus calories out and ignoring the whole endocrine side of it, which is massive and actually has a much bigger effect on weight loss and fat loss.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So what are some of the ways, just to start things off, that men and women are different when it comes to hormones and fat storage and fat loss?
Well, the biggest one probably is that men are not really influenced nearly as much about the two predominant female hormones of estrogen and progesterone. Now, we all have all three of the ones we're going to talk about now, estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. It just so happens that genetically, because of childbirth and being able to have children, that a woman is governed more by estrogen and progesterone. Men have very little of it, and we predominantly are fueled by testosterone. So that right there sets the landscape for a whole different set of metabolic factors that women go through in order to lose weight, because one of the biggest problems that we see in the world today is what we call estrogen dominance. And those of you who follow me know that I talk about this a lot, and I need to talk about it a lot because women need to understand this. What estrogen dominance means is that when the ratio between your two primary hormones of estrogen and progesterone begins to pull further and further apart, it's not how much you have of each, it's how far the ratio is pulling apart from each other, because these two hormones kind of antagonize each other. They counterbalance each other. But what ends up happening a lot of times is because that, I'm going to try to make this as simple as possible. Number one, we live in a world today where we are bombarded with what we call exogenous estrogens. They are in things like anytime you're eating anything that's coming out of a plastic bottle or a plastic container that's been heated up or it's been in the sun, we're leaching estrogen out of there into our system. Most of the plant pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, all have exogenous estrogens in them. It's even in some of the cosmetics that a lot of women use are getting exogenous estrogen. So we're being bombarded with a lot more estrogen than a woman's ever seen. So that is one step towards being estrogen dominant right there. Now, the other big one is this: stress. In the Western world, most everybody I work with is carrying too much stress in their life. Now, how this plays into this is that a little hormonal chemistry 101. So your body takes cholesterol from your liver, turns it into a master hormone that's called pregnenolone. Then from pregnenolone, there's a transition, and it's made into what's called progesterone. We call that the mother hormone because of the fact that if it's what gets you pregnant, keeps you pregnant, makes you have a healthy childbirth. Now, from progesterone, all your other steroid hormones can be made. So you can take progesterone and make it into estrogen, or you can take it and make it into something called DHEA, which is then turned into testosterone. But the big one that I wanted to get to was this. So your adrenal glands that sit on top of your kidneys manufacture a lot of hormones for you to keep you in balance. They're your stress glands. Without them, we would all die. But you've all heard about the flight or fright syndrome, where if back in the day, if you were being chased by a large animal, you needed some hormonal system to kick in that would make you be able to access muscle speed, muscle twitching, fiber at a quick rate, be able to utilize fuel sources. But anyway, that hormone is called cortisol. So, and I know that most of you women have heard about this, because certainly if you've listened to anything that I say, we are concerned about a chronic, mild elevation of cortisol slams the brakes on your body losing any body fat. Your body will not, because it thinks that you're under some type of prolonged stress. So it is not going to break down reserves of energy if we've got cortisol present traveling through our bloodstream, right? Okay, so anyway, back to where we were. So progesterone is what the body uses in order to make cortisol. So if you're stressed and you're already moving into perimenopause, which means you're declining in your progesterone production already anyway, then the little bit of progesterone that you still have is being used to make cortisol. So now we've created this estrogen dominance even further, and we have an excess level of cortisol. So this is where the frustration comes in with a woman who's, say, anywhere between 43 and 65, who is saying, this is just not working for me. I'm even trying low carb stuff and it's not working for me. Well, if we don't get checks and balances around what I just talked about, we're probably not going to get a whole lot of success. Now, on the other hand of that, if we do get that under control, then you're going to have the advantage almost to the point like a man could have when they do the keto and drop a bunch of weight, because they're not dealing with this estrogen and progesterone. But when we get that balanced out, there's a lot of success to be had. Now, where do you want to go with that, Vanessa?
Where some of the, I mean, those are such great points that you brought up. And I think that cortisol is really misunderstood. And there's just a lot of information on the internet about these hormones, about cortisol, that is parroted, that is not necessarily correct information. So I love taking the opportunity to really, provide the facts and, correct information for people so that they can understand, especially for women, they can understand how their hormone functions exactly. And I think it's so great that there's all this information coming out about cholesterol and how helpful it is and how we need it. We need these steroid hormones in order to make
Absolutely.
estrogen, and we want to have the right balance. So you talked a bit about a lot of xenoestrogens, a lot of estrogens in the environment. How does a woman correct the levels in the body to have the right balance?
Okay. Well, all right. So there would be a progression there. I'll lay it out the way that I see it. So number one, when you're talking about hormonal balance, well, you know what? I wanted to touch on one more thing. It just dawned on me because I want women to understand that I left something out that might be the biggest, most important part of what I was talking about earlier. If estrogen and progesterone are not balanced well and there's an estrogen dominant state, the biggest thing that this does to hinder your weight loss ability is that estrogen is not thyroid friendly. Now, it's not poisonous to the thyroid at all, but in the presence of too much estrogen, what happens is estrogen and thyroid, T3 called triiodothyronine, compete for certain binding sites on the cells of your body. And so if estrogen's in a dominant situation, it's going to have a tendency to win some of that battle out for binding sites, leaving thyroid hormone to float around in your bloodstream, but it's not actually getting into your cells. And so since we all know that the thyroid is the master gland of metabolism, that's not doing you any favors. Okay, so I see a lot of what we call subclinical hypothyroidism. Now, what this condition is that when a woman is presenting with 5 or 6 or 7 symptoms that we would typically see in a hypothyroid case, but her TSH level is normal. Okay, so what's happening there, the reason that this is happening is because you've got thyroid hormone in your system, so your TSH level is staying down where it should be, but it's not getting into the cells of your body, so you're developing all the symptoms of hypothyroidism. This would include things like inability to stay asleep at night, weight gain, water retention, fatigue, mainly in the middle of the afternoon, cold hands and feet, changes in hair, either getting more coarse or beginning to fall out. A lot of these symptoms, a lot of you probably identify with, but your doctor has said, well, your thyroid is normal, so therefore that doesn't have anything to do with it. Well, it may. So, okay, now let's get to what Vanessa was talking about what do you do about this? Well, again, we're going to stay in the realm first about what you can do on your own without any guidance from a physician like myself or something like that. So the way this works is most of this hormonal chemistry in one way or another is related and has something to do with being metabolized within liver function. So the big rule of thumb is you always want to be taking care of liver health if you want proper hormonal balance. Because again, if we go back to this estrogen dominance thing I'm talking about, what has to answer this problem is, number one, you can do things to stay away from exogenous estrogens the best that you can. That would be doing things like, not drinking stuff out of plastic and whatnot, making sure your cosmetics don't have, extra added steroids or estrogens in them, trying to eat as much organic produce as possible. I know you can't always do that, and nor do I think that you have to do that all the time. It's not about going completely organic unless that's really easy for you financially and it's available to you. it's not a 100% necessary thing. But this is bringing down your exogenous exposure to something like xenoestrogens. So that's taking some of the brunt off of the liver. Another thing is, so you would want to be looking at, since the liver is involved in chelating excess estrogen and removing it out through the body through various pathways like cytochrome P450, other ones we won't really get into. But but you can help this with a number of things. And now we'll get into like why diet, what would you want to know with way of eating or diet about this. So B vitamins. B vitamins would be crucial to binding up exogenous estrogen. So where are we going to get B vitamins if you're not taking them? We can talk about supplements later. So B vitamins would be very well represented in things like meat, particularly red meat, yolk of eggs, most of your animal-based protein. So this is a big plus of why it is that this diet, this way of eating that we're all kind of familiar with now, of eating a ketogenic diet, is loaded with nutrient-dense foods, including all those B vitamins that are going to help remove estrogen from your system. Another great thing to do, if you have this, the desire of the stomach for it, is to include a little bit of liver into your diet. You can, most people can find a way to make this taste really good. Some people like the taste of it anyway. But by including a little bit of liver in your diet, maybe once a week, you are providing your liver with all kinds of really good nutrients that are helping with hormonal balancing. So that would be good.
There's also an interesting connection. Sorry, just a side note there with iron and the thyroid, which explains, I think, why a lot of women have hypothyroidism more than men. They just tend to eat a lot less red meat that we see, and it touches on the B vitamin element as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, iron's a crucial thing. A lot of times we'll see thyroid issues with somebody who, down the road, this usually takes a little bit until some doctor decides to run something like a ferritin level. We don't really know that this woman has been anemic for quite a long period of time and is having problem, you think about the thyroid and the iron in terms of oxygenation. What you're looking for to be a fat burner is really good oxygenation into the cells of your body. So iron is driving that through the hemoglobin in your blood to be able to attract iron and move that to the tissues. And then thyroid is what plugs into the cell to open up the respiration to get the oxygen into the mitochondria. So big crucial things that, we want to pay attention to when we're looking at a woman and why she may be not getting the success that she wants to. So, you got another question?
Yeah, I know. I think that's just a really interesting connection too. And I'm curious if you've seen that there's a really great article I read by Finney and Volek where they found actually that there's a lot of alarm sometimes made about people's thyroid levels going down on low carb diets. And what they were saying is that it's very similar actually to insulin sensitivity, and that your body actually becomes more sensitive to thyroid hormone the more you correct it with proper diet and whole foods nutrition, that it actually needs less of it to activate the same amount. And it's all very interesting with what you're saying about B vitamins binding that excess estrogen, because I think that's one thing I didn't really know much about, that it has an ability to bind it, and that if thyroid and estrogen are competitively seeking the same binding sites in the body, I mean, it just really makes sense why low carb is so useful in, being that first step in terms of, reclaiming and restoring that hormonal balance.
Right. I think it's great. Now, I'm going to touch on what you just mentioned. Here's where, again, I like to stir up controversy, but I'm interested. My interest is completely in results driven, and I work within. I want to make it very clear to any of you listening to me that my specialty really falls within this particular phase of a woman's life that is somewhere in the mid 40s to around 60. So with that being said, I'm going to tell you why that I have my slant on what works for women in this age group is different than the true typical ketogenic diet. You mentioned Finney and Volek. I take a little bit of we don't play well together in this group of women, because what I believe that where some of that thyroid issue that we see that may show up on a low carb diet, that they might say that, well, eventually that's just because the thyroid's becoming more sensitive. I see that the thyroid is primarily driven by protein in the diet. And too many people in this group, I believe, too many women follow the trying to get 75 to 80% of their macro into the fat category, dropping their protein low because they believe that protein is somehow going to spike insulin and drive glucose production. And we're going to talk about why that's not what happens. But anyway, I think that too many women in that group, or the ones that work with me, are not eating enough protein and are taking in too much fat, and the macros need to be adjusted for this phase of life, and to move that protein up, drop that fat down just a little bit, and then we find a real sweet spot, and thyroid functions really, really well. So do you want me to go further into that? Or
let's talk about what is your approach and framework in terms of macros, and what kind of emphasis do you place on actually being in ketogenesis?
Okay. Well, okay, in order to explain that, I need to get people to understand, that we need to talk about protein and we need to talk about gluconeogenesis, because there is too much bad information out there. We need to, so the way that it works is this. We know this. We know that your body can convert either protein or fat into glucose on an as-needed basis. Okay, this is why we also know that carbohydrates are not in any way a requirement by human beings. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't eat any of them, or if you like to eat them, but what it means is you don't have a requirement for carbohydrate, because you can make sugar out of protein and fat. Now, with that being said, we also know that so the fear has been that by eating a bunch of protein, you get an insulin spike and your blood sugar can elevate, and that takes you out of ketosis, and now you're not doing a ketogenic diet. Mm. That pretty much does not prove to be true at all. And the reason why that is this. Gluconeogenesis, which is the process by which your body would make glucose out of amino acids, is demand driven. It's not supply driven. You can't stimulate gluconeogenesis by eating protein food. What happens is when your body needs some blood glucose, it will turn amino acids into sugar. How it does this is this, and this is why people do see a little bit of an insulin. Certainly we wouldn't call it a spike. You do get a little bit of a rise out of insulin when you eat a big protein-rich meal. But here's why that happens. Because protein drives the hormone that works in conjunction with insulin called glucagon. Glucagon is what happens when your body needs to make some carbohydrate to fuel the little bit that needs to be in your bloodstream all the time, or your brain. So when you eat a bunch of protein, you stimulate this hormone called glucagon. Glucagon sends a signal to the liver saying, dump some stored glycogen into the bloodstream to be turned into glucose, which is glycogen basically is a bunch of glucose stuck together in chains, right? So you eat a bunch of protein, glucagon elevates, stimulates the liver to dump glycogen to turn it into glucose. This is what you want to happen. This is further depleting the liver of glycogen storage, which is allowing you to spend most of your time having to access body fat for food. So if you're following me, you can see that the reason that I take stance with this, again, I want to remove this fear of protein. I believe that protein is the king macro for human beings and should always be that way. Now, I need to explain why it is that my macros are a little bit different for this group of women that I'm talking about. You got to understand that estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, which are all three beginning to move downward when you hit your probably early 40s, but certainly by mid to late 40s and all the way through menopause, these three hormones are moving down and going to almost rest where you don't have any of them anymore by the time you're probably 60. Okay. All three of the hormones I just mentioned are part of your metabolic pathway of how you burn energy. So when you're in a, shouldn't use this word, but I will use it anyway. When you're in a hormonally deficient state, we'll say, you have just lowered your metabolic pathway to access energy, meaning this, you have also lowered your body's requirement for high energy density foods. Now, if you're following what I'm saying, is this is the reason why a woman who might be 50 years old, who's not doing so well on a 70% fat, 20% protein, and 10% carbohydrate diet or something like that, 5%, who begins to shift and bring down the fat a bit and drive up the protein a bit, because at 50 years old and being a female, a diet of 75% fat, that you don't have the metabolic pathways and being able to take care of all of that excess energy. It's got to go somewhere. You're not going to burn it off in a 24-hour period of time. So that's going to have to be, put into adipose tissue. So what you're trying to do, and Ted Naiman does this very well of explaining about this protein to energy ratio, where you're looking to eat high protein foods and keep the overall energy intake to a lower state than it would be if you were eating, say, a grain-based diet. So anyway, it's a long story to answer your question, Vanessa, is this. If I had to, it's different for each individual I work with, but if I had to pick where I think that a pretty good bullseye for a peri and postmenopausal woman is trying to eat a low carbohydrate and staying in ketosis at the same time, I'd be looking at her macros being around 50 to 55% fat and trying to get her protein up to maybe 35 to 40% would be awesome. And then the rest of it made up by high water content, low carbohydrate, vegetable food, if they care to eat it. I know a lot of people are moving into the carnivore space now. I'm not but my position on this is that I think it's a perfectly healthy diet. If done correctly, I think that you can certainly excel at it and probably have some advantages if you're dealing with autoimmune problems and things like that. I don't find it to be a requirement for most of the people that I work with that they have, that carnivore is the ultimate goal for this. It's not necessary.
Yeah, and I think it's great that you have your own approach and that you've really, dialed it in specifically for the demographic that you specialize in as well, because you understand hormonal health so well. And, those levels are still very much a high-fat diet. It sounds like, a 1-to-1 ratio or somewhere around there and greater for protein and fat is kind of what you're looking at.
I am so glad that you just mentioned that, because I get hammered a lot on Twitter, or where I spend most of my time, with these people saying, oh no, Dr. Wrigley's now telling people to eat a low-fat diet. How in the world is 50 to 55% of the calories you eat every day coming from saturated fat, which is what I would want most people to eat, a low-fat diet? That's it's crazy. But again, it's really just about energy partitioning to me. It's not about, I don't want to get hung up too much with fighting with people about, that, you need all of them. I find that most of my patients would tell you that they believe that protein is more satiating than fat is. Now, certainly there's a certain percentage who argue that and say, to me, I need all of that fat in order to feel full. I would say find this out for yourself. But the truth of the matter is that if you're eating a bunch of good quality protein with all of the fat that came with that protein, like you're eating steak and you're eating eggs and you're eating, things that, high fat fish, things like that. The point is, I would rather see people chasing satiety than ketones. because you're going to lose weight either way. If you're keeping your insulin levels low, your body's going to have to go after body fat for fuel. So winning the battle here is to keep yourself satiated so that you're not sitting around thinking about food all the time and wishing that you could eat food. You're not supposed to eat food. The best way to do that, I believe, is to keep your protein up and make sure that you eat all the fat that comes with that protein, but you don't need to be dousing your food in fat. That's my whole thing for the demographic that I work in, is that, listen, ladies, you don't, whatever you learned in the beginning, great. You learned about low carb. You don't need to be filling your morning coffee up with 2 tablespoons of butter and a bunch of MCT oil and trying to jam more fat into all your meals. Just let the fat come with the really good quality food choices.
Exactly. I always emphasize that the fat comes with meat. If you prioritize, getting in protein, you're going to get the fat that comes with the egg, the yolk that comes with the egg yolk, the whole egg. If you're eating whole foods, the steak is going to have, the fish, all of that's going to have fat naturally in it, unless it's like a really lean, chicken breast or turkey, breast or something like that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I do think I personally have found more satiety with making sure that I prioritize and emphasize protein. I would like to ask you about the fact that I do think that some people can end up going back into more of a glycolytic state when protein is really being eaten excessively. And I know that that's a term that's hard to understand, because if you're looking at someone who's very, very sedentary and they don't move around a lot during the day and they don't do any workouts of any kind, and they're eating like, say, 4 or 5 pounds of meat a day, the body doesn't have a storage, capacity for that excess protein. So at that point, I think that someone may actually push themselves, even on, say, 0 carb, back into a glycolytic state where they are predominantly burning sugar and not being in ketosis. So at that point, I think that there can be sort of a upper limit on doing too much protein, but more so going for the optimal amount that's going to support restoring and replenishing the tissue that you need to, and provide all those building blocks that your body needs, but that there has to be some level where, there's too much protein being taken in. Although it's very hard to overeat protein, which is what I find for myself, and I see a lot in people. It's just like when you've had your fill, your body usually is just done, and it tells you very, very clearly.
I agree, and I think that I'd love to talk. I can talk. Listen, sometime we'll do this for hours. I did the whole pathways, and I know that you love that stuff too. My counterpoint to what you just said, Vanessa, is not. I totally understand what you're saying and agree with it, but I wanted to draw on 2 things. One is protein. Under-eating protein is probably the rule, not the exception. So these days, so overeating protein, that's hard. I agree with you. It's kind of hard to do. The other thing, the safeguard that we do have within the body is what you just mentioned, and it's a great one for people to understand. You can't store protein. It's the only of the 3 macros, you can't store any of it away, because amino acids cannot be stored in the human body. So if you eat way too much amino acids that your body can't use, that's going to be excreted. Now, there is a little bit of that stimulating what Vanessa's talking about, this glycolytic pathway, but you can rest assured that there's no place that it gets stored as body fat, because other than the fact that if you were to create too much, wow, that's getting, I think, way over the top where this should go. But anyway, so I think that, this is where you just use mindfulness. And I would not recommend somebody very sedentary to sit around and, end up eating 300, 400 grams of protein a day. You look at a guy like Sean Baker, who probably consumes 4.5 pounds of meat a day or something like that. But is able to retain, probably body fat in the single digits. this guy is throwing, this guy's very active. He's throwing around a lot of heavy weight, doing a lot of rowing and all this kind of stuff. So you would need that kind of activity.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's my only thing with the, prioritizing protein, I think, is key. And it's way worse to be not getting enough of it than to be, maybe overdoing it or kind of leaning a little bit over and getting a little bit too much of it than not getting enough. Because it does provide all of those essential amino acids that we need. And then it has all these other wonderful effects as well, like you were saying, in being able to bind estrogens, but it also provides all the precursors for our enzymes, our peptide hormones, all of these, essential factors that we need in the body. So if we go back to hormone talk, I think that is just, it's so great to talk about it because there's just so much misinformation out there, especially about certain hormones, and just understanding hormones more and making that more accessible to people so they can understand what a huge factor it plays. So we know that hormones really determine on women and men also where fat is stored. Is that right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So all right. So one thing that women need we need to probably walk through is that estrogen in and of itself does a number of things. It does a number of great things. All right. Let's talk about that. When I'm dealing with a woman who's having hot flashes or night sweats, right, I need to explain to her that why is this happening? It's because estrogen, the analogy I use, this is a little bit crude, I understand, but it's a good analogy, is estrogen is like the radiator fluid in your car. It is what keeps the internal organ systems cool, especially the liver. The liver is the most metabolically active organ in your body. It has a tendency to already burn very bright because it's most of the billions of chemical reactions are taking place in the liver every second of every day. But estrogen is kind of like this fluid that keeps things cool. So when it begins to decline, things are running hot, right? And especially the liver is very active in the middle of the night, between the hours of like 1 and 4 o'clock. A lot of women will find that I wake up every night between 1 and 3 o'clock or so. I cannot get back to bed. I'm sweating or I'm really hot and have to throw the covers off. This is not enough estrogen to keep the liver cool, basically. Okay? So that's one understanding of why you would have symptoms in menopause. Now, a lot of women who follow a low-carb diet find that they don't have that much because they're feeding their liver various factors that keep it running nice and smooth, and it's not overacting in the middle of the night to clean up a bunch of garbage that was consumed all day long. So that can be very helpful. Another thing is that the low carbohydrate diet, which by definition is a higher fat diet, is providing your body with as much of the building blocks to make as much progesterone as you possibly can at that age. Some of that progesterone is going to get manufactured into estrogen. So you're always going to have a little bit of it, but you can have more than most people who eat a SAD diet by focusing on getting healthy fat in your diet, for sure. Let's see, where else did we want to go with that?
Really fascinating way to understand estrogen better and what it sort of is doing and what it's actually doing in the body. I've never heard of it explained that way before.
Well, that's the big way to explain why there's so many heat-related symptoms with estrogen deficiency. Estrogen also has a tendency to, again, estrogen is a wonderful hormone. I mean, every woman, I know everyone over you are thankful to have that. The problem is when it gets out of checks and balances. And so when there's too much of it, estrogen does a few things. One is it suppresses blood sugar, therefore stimulating appetite. Number two, when there's an excess of it, since your estrogen in your body is stored in your adipocytes, right? So your adipose tissue, your fat tissue, that's where your estrogen is, right? So let me say, I'll move into why does a lot of women, again, find two things can happen when you begin a ketogenic diet and you're, say, menopausal. One is one of the reasons why you might find that your menopause symptoms go away beginning a ketogenic diet is as you are opening up fat cells in order to break open that fat to use it for energy, you're also releasing estrogen into your system. So you're getting the benefit of this low estrogen levels. Now you're getting a nice new supply of estrogen that's been stored away. Now, the reverse of that can work also though. So let's say that you're already kind of estrogen dominant that we've been talking about. You go on a ketogenic diet, you flood your body with more estrogen from the fat cells that are opening up. This could accentuate symptoms. I'll see this sometimes with a patient saying that, I went on the ketogenic diet and my periods started to get really heavy for a while and they were getting closer together. And I was developing all this PMS symptoms of breast tenderness and water retention and whatnot. It's because for a while there, as you're dumping this estrogen from the fat tissue into the bloodstream again, you might accentuate this estrogen dominance that we're talking about. Now, there's a lot of things that we can do about that. We can utilize, I might put a woman on bioidentical progesterone to balance that out. I might use some nutritional supplementation to help speed the liver to clear estrogen. Things like diindol methane, which is, I'll tell you a little bit about that one because it's fascinating for perimenopausal women of what it will do for you. So there is a phytochemical that comes from cruciferous vegetables that is called indole-3 carbinol. It's a phytonutrient that's got lots of different beneficial properties as far as antioxidation and things like that. But where it really is sweet is that when you consume it, let's say you eat Brussels sprouts or broccoli, you get some of this indole-3 carbinol into your system. Your body turns that into something called diindol methane. We just call it DIM, D-I-M. Now, DIM is remarkable because what it does is when we talked about B vitamins and protein-rich food binding up excess estrogen, nothing does this better than DIM. DIM's influence on the liver to chelate estrogen, exogenous estrogens, and pull them out of the body through the liver and through the kidneys is second to none that I've ever seen. So when we see a woman with extreme, estrogen dominant symptoms who needs hormonal balancing in, let's say, late perimenopause, this is a great nutritional supplement.
That's really great. And is there anything else that helps to bind excess estrogen?
Well, so we talked about B vitamins, specifically vitamin B6. So when you eat red meat or yolk of eggs, you're going to get a fair amount of what's called B6, which is called pyridoxine. Your body then has to convert that into something called pyridoxal 5-phosphate. And what that does, activated B6, is it goes to the liver and it binds up estrogen. And well, it doesn't really bind. What it does is it drives the detoxification pathway for that estrogen goes through in order to be cleared out of your system. Now, what activated B6 also does is it's used by the ovaries in the manufacturing of progesterone. So when you're trying to balance out and bring estrogen down and progesterone up to be, in a better hormonal state, because progesterone drives fat loss, whereas estrogen kind of stores fat. So B6 can be a wonderful, simple tool. Now, again, I don't see too many cases that could not get enough of this out of diet alone. But there may be some cases that there's a lag time between them changing their eating habits or whatnot. We want to really straighten this problem out. We might use some activated B6 in a supplement form for a while until they've got their eating to where they can do it without supplementation.
That's really interesting. So do you find that as a first step, if women are prioritizing optimal protein, doing a low-carb diet, that this tends to be one of the bigger factors in the body then naturally sort of balancing out these hormones?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm understanding what you're saying exactly, Vanessa, I think my answer would have to be like this. I think that it's paramount. I think that the dietary piece, or I'd rather use way of eating, is paramount beyond anything that has to be done. Because without it, trying to solve the problem hormonally without the diet work or the influence of moving your diet into better insulin sensitivity and keeping your insulin low and using a low carbohydrate diet trying to do it without any improvement in that, that's a tough road. I mean, I've spent, you know, like quarter of a century, it seems like, trying to figure that out. And yes, it can be very, very beneficial in some cases to do things like hormone replacement therapy, using smart bioidentical, natural hormones, I believe, thyroid support, all the types of things that I deal with on a daily basis can make a huge difference. But I'm at the point in my life, in my practice now, where if we're not going to do the diet part of this, then I don't want to play. Because you're really not doing yourself that much service by trying to. It becomes what it becomes in is, for those of you who understand this term, allopathic medicine, right? So the allopathic principles of medicine, which is the standard 99% of what you see in the American health model, would be really trying to give the body something to remove symptoms. It's basically the pharmaceutical approach to, you've got this medicine will help with the removal of that symptom. So that's not a good healthcare system model. We need to move away from that. We need to look at what are the root causes of these problems. So the reason I was saying that is what I find that me and Vanessa were just talking about is if you get into, you want me to fix your problem hormonally without doing the diet work, then all that I'm really doing is throwing things that are manipulating pathways that, yes, probably will have some symptom benefit to it, but we're not dealing with that reversing this problem. We're not really getting to the root cause of this problem, and so it's like I'm providing you Band-Aids for some, but we're not stopping the bleeding, right? It's other than you don't see it. The analogy I like to use for that is, removing the smoke alarm when the fire in the apartment has already started is pretty useless, right? But there's a lot of this in medicine today is, here, your cholesterol is high, take a statin. Here, you're hypertensive, here's your losartan, or your lisinopril. It's like a this for that when we've got the tools right in front of us of how to, reduce insulin resistance, pull back hyperinsulinemia, shut down inflammation. You can do this. 99% of this you can do through diet. Now, again, I happen to work in that subset of groups where diet doesn't fix this for every woman that I work with, for sure. And any woman that I that I hear say, life is perfect, all my hormones are in complete balance, and I lose weight and whatever just because I went on a low carb diet. Hey, I hope that's all of your cases, but not proven to be true. Sometimes there's some tweaking that needs to be done. Sometimes some macros need to be shifted because the way your body reacts to food is a little different than somebody else. But the great thing about this group of, this tribe of people that we're building that are into the low carb is it's the encouragement of this N equals 1 thing, Vanessa. You watch with the people that you work with that sometimes a little tweak made all the difference in the world, But that wouldn't necessarily in the next person that you work with, So it's, I think that's the fun of it.
Yeah, definitely. And it is so interesting also in the same person how something different at a different time can also work well depending on other circumstances.
Well, I think, this is what we've really been talking about that I hope people understand is, we started this conversation off where most of the women I work with, again, let's say somebody comes to see me or we work together through video, and let's say they're a 44-year-old woman or something like that who is flabbergasted because she used to be able to drop 10 pounds in 2 weeks with just a couple of simple changes, and she has done that most of her life. Oh, okay, I picked up 10 over Christmas this year, whatnot. I just hit the gym a little bit harder, cut back on a few things in my diet, maybe reduce my calories a little bit, got the 10 pounds off. That worked for the first 30 years of her life. Now, with the changing of the landscape of the hormones, Doesn't work that way anymore, right? So they went out and did the same thing this time, and they didn't lose a pound, and they're like, what just happened? Well, what just happened is that the internal biochemistry at the age now of 44 compared to at 32 looks completely different, and that has to be addressed. Now, you can do that with primarily diet, but you've got to really drive the carbohydrate down. You got to really keep it low.
Yeah, and I also love how you really emphasize protein, because as we grow in life, we need more and more of it, right? Especially, we see, a lot of sarcopenic obesity and these kinds of things growing as people grow in age. And, bone is mineralized protein, and our muscle mass, we just accept that, it's supposed to go down as you age and you're going to lose it. But maybe that's not necessarily the case.
Oh, yeah, I think that not only that, but here's another piece of that. Not only I'll use the term elderly. We'll talk about elderly for a minute, meaning I don't even know what that age that is anymore. But the reason that they need more protein is just what you said. The tendency would be towards skeletal muscle to begin to decline and weaken, the sarcopenia, the osteoporosis, osteopenia, stuff like that, which needs that protein fuel. But the second thing is this: unfortunately, all the digestive enzymes and acids that it takes to digest protein begin to decline pretty sharply when we hit the ages of late 40s and around 50. So you need more protein. You need more protein than you ever have, but most people are eating less of it. Then they're producing less betaine hydrochloric acid in their stomach. So they're not fully digesting protein as well as or efficiently as they used to. So let's say they're only now extracting about 50% of the protein that they used to from eating a steak. So if you look at it in that terms, this is why that you always probably need to continuously rise in your protein consumption throughout your life.
Now, what's your opinion on fasting and intermittent fasting, and is it different for women?
That's a great subject. Okay, so my first, I guess the place to start out is I 100% believe in intermittent fasting. I think that if you look at the benefits of spending, just like we would say benefits of spending time in ketosis for not just the fat loss, but to produce these ketone bodies that have such a powerful impact on neurological health and heart health. So you want to spend some time in ketosis. So the next one is you want to spend some time in this state of autophagy. And for those of you who don't understand maybe what that is, I'll try to simplify it. Vanessa maybe has already taught you guys all of this, but when you go for a long enough period of time between your last meal and your next meal, you reach a stage where your body goes into simply a brilliant house cleaning mode. And what it does is it recycles your cells. And so it takes old, worn out cells and replaces them with new, vibrant, healthy cells. Most people in the Western world, for sure, never spend any time in this state. And so they're never really doing full repair and getting this regeneration of cell cycles because they never go for a long enough period of time without eating. So the idea of intermittent fasting or time-restricted feeding is really this, that you begin to some days, or if not every day, you extend out a little bit the time that you typically would go between your last meal and your first meal. So the most common way to do this is to eat your last meal, let's say at 7 o'clock one night, and then the next day you skip breakfast and you maybe start your eating around 11 or noon. That way you haven't spent a lot of time in this autophagy, but you've certainly spent a couple of hours, probably, more than likely, unless you ate a bunch of carbohydrate for your last meal. But anyway, so what we find is people that build this pattern, who go in and do this intermittent fasting, you're spending more time accessing body fat for fuel. You're doing cellular repair work. You're removing risk factors for things like, there's all these great studies about what the stage will do for you through mitochondrial health and prevention of things like Alzheimer's disease and dementia, improving longevity, lifespans, and things like that. Cardiovascular risk factors are dropping because you're lowering your triglycerides even further. You're raising your HDL levels even higher. There's just so many benefits to that. Now, and we have two other parts to this that Vanessa asked. I'll try to touch on quickly. Or this, my thoughts on fasting. There are so many. Yeah, when I got into this field of work 20-some years ago, I was very interested in fasting. There was a guy by the name of Paul Bragg at the time who wrote books about fasting. And
I love him.
Anyway, what's that?
I really love him and his. He had a great blog.
Yeah, right. So I mean, so there was a time in my life that I was really fascinated with it, and then I got away from it. Now we're seeing a rejuvenation of this through Dr. Fung's work. I'm going to leave it to this. Here's my thought on it, and I think that Dr. Fung and me are in alignment with this. But he's the go-to guy around here for this. I believe that there is a cross point of the benefits of fasting and where you lose the benefits of where the benefits of fasting no longer outweigh the stress that you're placing on the body. Okay, and my definition of that is for the most part, I think that after somewhere in between the 48-hour to 72-hour mark, you are hitting a point where the benefits of the fasting are being outweighed for the additional stress that you're causing to your adrenal glands and the cortisol production that is having to take place because your body does not know how long you're going to do this for. So for people who are interested in fasting, I'm all for it. But I like for my clients who are really interested in that, I think the sweet spot for anybody who wants to do fasting is really like a 36-hour fast. Basically going an entire day without food, and then you break that fast the next day. I think you get some wonderful benefits to it. I know other people would say that no, you really need a 72-hour fast. I'm going to leave it at that. I think anybody who wanted to begin that journey of practicing a little bit more fast, keep it to the 24, 36 occasionally, and then look to somebody outside myself for guidance if you want to go further. But just know that too many people get into this, just like this progression that we saw go on from, how many people do you know who went from eating a regular diet to eating a paleo diet, then to eating a low carb diet, then to eating a ketogenic diet, then to eating a carnivore diet, then to who knows what's next, only organ systems or balls.
Breath is probably next.
Yeah, so it's like, so anyway, I see a lot of that in the fasting group too, of like, hey, I did a 24-hour fast, I feel great. Now I want to go a week without food. I feel like I need to pull it back in sometimes and go, listen, let's look at our objective, what you're trying to accomplish, and where that sweet spot is, and leave the extreme things kind of out of the picture is kind of where I follow.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things that I've always loved speaking about since I first started doing this several years ago is how keto is a fasting mimetic. And just the carbohydrate restriction alone activates so many of the same pathways in calorie restriction. And so if you are especially trying to heal the body and hormonal issues, then there is that stress factor that you mentioned about cortisol and, adrenal repair that is so, so important. And that, you can overly stress the body by trying to do all the things all the time, as opposed to just really, if your goal, like you said, is optimal hormonal functioning, then I agree. I think those short fasts are a great way to just give your cells a little bit of boost in that cellular debris, cleansing, and but while really like caring and taking good care of your body at the same time.
Right. Oh, I wanted to mention one last thing that you led me into with that last question, and that was this. Again, with the group of people that I work with, my specialty, here's an interesting thing that I'm finding now, and I'm going to leave it as anecdotal a little bit, although I'm starting to understand the chemistry a little bit better, but just make note of this. If you're a woman who's kind of in that age category, dealing with any of the stuff that I deal with that we've talked about, an interesting thing that I'm finding is that a lot of women with the idea of intermittent fasting in peri and post-menopause are finding that if they do their intermittent fasting more with the circadian rhythm clock that we all have that governs our kind of our hormonal fluctuations throughout the day. And what that means is this. What I said to you earlier was that the standard way of doing intermittent fasting, typically last meal of the day is your dinner, and you start later eating in the day. A lot of women are finding with hormonal issues that if they reverse that and they feed themselves earlier in the morning, maybe having breakfast at 6:30 or 7 o'clock in the morning, but they shut their eating off, that their last meal of the day is around, say, 3 o'clock, and they do it that way. Because if you look at this is a little complicated, but if we were to look at how the cortisol rhythms in your body, the thyroid patterns in your body, your estrogen and progesterone and whatnot, and how they function in a 24-hour period of time in a optimal state, and you feed yourself accordingly, which would be earlier in the day feeding. A lot of women find that was the thing that took them off their stall, made all the difference in the world. Now, I haven't seen that works for everybody, and I also know this, a lot of times for social reasons, like having a family and dinner time being the big meal of the day, that doesn't always work into somebody's lifestyle. But I'm telling you that because if a lot of stuff has not been working for you, you might want to give that a try, because I'm seeing a lot of success with it with my female clients who want to try that out. And again, that's about as much as I can tell you right now of the real biochemistry behind it. I don't know it all yet, and I'm hoping to find out more about that. But it might be worth a try for you. So.
Yeah, I've seen Dr. Sachin Panda at the Salk Institute's been doing some really interesting research with that, aligning circadian rhythms and stuff. So maybe people can look at some research there as well. So that's a really great tip. What are 3 tips that you could leave our listeners with today in terms of, balancing hormones and fat loss and just feeling great?
3. So, we've already, this will be kind of like highlighting what this whole conversation was back. My 3 would be this. Prioritize protein, and think of your fat intake in terms mainly of the fat that comes with that protein. Now, again, we're use common sense here. We're not talking about you can't use a little pat of butter or ghee to make your broccoli and cauliflower and Brussels sprouts taste better if that's what you're eating. But focus on protein-rich food and the fat that comes with it. That way you will be getting enough of both of those. And so, again, that's going to naturally be doing what we're talking about, of maybe for most women increasing their protein a little bit and maybe dialing that fat back just a little bit, because you don't need that excessive amount of energy at this time of life. That would be number 1. Number 2 would be, I'm going to say, practice some intermittent fasting, but for sure. And it's not just because of the intermittent fasting. What it is that people in the Western world anyway, we just eat too much and too often. Our bodies were not really, if you think about this, try to think about, Neolithic man or before agriculture. What was your ability to eat more than once a day was slim to none. You're going to go out and spend your energy on trying to hunt successfully. If that is successful, you're going to have enough food to gorge yourself and feast and not be hungry for probably a couple of days, maybe. But anyway, I think you get what I'm saying, is that this frequency of eating and so much damage was done with this idea of telling people to eat small meals throughout the day 6 times because it'll stoke your metabolism and keep you running at whatever they made that myth up to be, was disastrous for us. But some people are having a hard time losing that mindset and thinking that I at least need to have 3 meals a day. By all means, you do not. And there's a lot of benefits to only eating twice a day. And sometimes eating just 1 big meal a day. So that would be my number 2 health tip. And then number 3, let's see, for these.
I mean, I would say consulting with someone like you, it sounds like you have a lot of very specialized knowledge on specific supplements and different aids, and that really needs to be tailored and customized to each person.
And I'm like, yeah, thanks for saying that. I mean, that you know, I try to. I'm not all that great at self promotion, but I would say that what I enjoy about my work and what I think ends up being successful for people is that when you have somebody who's going to take a look at your particular situation, where you are in your age group, what's going on with your hormones right now, and for those who need to know this, for the majority of the time, we don't really need to test hormones. It's futile a lot, and doctors who spend a lot of people's money on testing hormones, when you know that an hour after you just tested that hormone, that doesn't look like that anymore at all. So you're getting this 1 second spot look in time of where somebody's hormones are that way. Not only that, but what's important about the female hormones is not the amount of it that's traveling from one place to another in the blood that has to be bound by some protein. It's how much of the hormone do you have somewhere stored in your body? We can't test for that, really. So anyway, where I was going with this is to have somebody to look at your particular situation who can understand something like, okay, I can see this shift that's beginning to take place, that progesterone's dropping, you're using too much of it into making cortisol, putting you kind of in estrogen dominance, which is slowing down your thyroid function a little bit, you're not losing weight or whatnot. And then be able to design not only the particular way to do a ketogenic diet by shifting macros for that particular person that's going to be optimal for them, but then maybe bringing in a couple of things that we could use for a little while through nutritional supplementation, could even use some bioidentical hormones if necessary, but to build an individual plan based on these are the results that we are out to do. We're out to correct, insulin problems. We're out to correct the accumulation of body fat mass. We're out to correct, we want you sleeping better, have more energy throughout the day or whatnot. And here is a plan of action that addresses that with this specific person. I think it's a real advantage.
Yeah, this is really excellent. Now, we did get a couple of Twitter questions in response to your tweet, so I'm going to have to ask you a couple rapid fire from Audrey Jean. We have, I am dealing with likely long-term insulin resistance and recovering from type 2 diabetes with an A1C of 12.5 in February, now normal. How long does it take and what does progress look like over time? I'm fasting and on keto, 61-year-old female, off all medications, but blood glucose will often be slow to drop after eating.
Okay, so yeah, somewhere in there, what was the exact question that you wanted to answer? First of all, great work for whoever. Yeah, fantastic job you've done.
That's what I was thinking also. Now, her main question is, how long does it take for someone who has long-term insulin resistance and is recovering, and what should progress look like over time? What should she expect?
Well, I think the short answer to this, and it's not, the answer to that question is, I have to answer it like this from a physician standpoint. This is closely related to the analogy of being an alcoholic, meaning that you have done such a fantastic job, but you are susceptible. You are susceptible that if you return to a normal diet, which I can imagine that you're never going back to, but if you went back to the way of eating that led you down that pathway, it would lead you right back down that pathway. So if you're understanding how I'm answering this, the question is, what you do is you continuously keep this type 2 diabetes in remission by doing what you've been doing, and you don't change that. It doesn't ever get to the point where you're completely fixed and now I could go out and do whatever I want to do, unfortunately. But I don't think you want to do that anyway. Hey, yeah, applaud to you for what you've done to turn that around, and just keep doing it.
Yeah, that's an awesome response. The other question we had was from Simon Lemonnier. Can keto be used to treat silent reflux? How do you remove the pepsin from the esophagus? I think he means acid reflux. I haven't heard silent reflux before. Are you familiar with that?
Well, silent reflux, he could mean that reflux that doesn't seem to be necessarily triggered by food. I don't know exactly what they're talking about, but I'm trying to work through the biochemistry of why would you want to remove the pepsin. You know what, an interesting way for him to look at this is, what we're finding now that about 90% of the people that actually have what we would call acid reflux or GERD or something like this is not related to an overproduction of stomach acid. It's related to an under-acidity of the stomach, and something that we call hypochlorhydria or achlorhydria. And it might be that this person needs more betaine hydrochloric acid and pepsin, not less of it, to actually help them digest their food better. But again, I'm going to have to answer this question that if this person really wanted me to figure this out, how to answer that for them, they would need to get in touch with me, because there's not enough information there for me to quite understand what they're dealing with. Yeah, but wait a minute, I will touch on this. Here's what I would say about that is, we do find that the majority of the time that people with upper digestive irritation go on a low-carb ketogenic diet, that gets way better, if not completely clears up. So if you have been thinking about that and haven't done that yet, you're wondering, would it be a good idea? I would say absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point you brought up, that most people think it's excess acidity, when it's often we need more acidity to break down the food. And digestive enzymes, taking apple cider vinegar, I know a lot of people have had success with those kinds of things too. But yeah, I mean, consulting directly with you would probably be the best way. Now, how can people do that? Where can people find you and follow more from you? You put out really great, really helpful information for women, so much great knowledge and information about hormone health. Where can people go and follow you online and get in touch with you?
So let's see. So in my social media presence, for everyone listening to this who would want to check out what I do, all of my three main Twitter is where I spend the majority of my time, but I also spending more time on Instagram and Facebook. All three of those are simply with the @ and then keto, KETO, doc, DOC, and then CLT for Charlotte, North Carolina, where I spend the majority of my time. So keto, doc, CLT, you'll find me on any of the three platforms on social media. If you want to see how all of this is grouped together, what I do, and my business partner, Dr. Michelle Dowker, go to my website, Dr. Wrigley, Wrigley. So drwrigley.com. Now, we also have one other thing I want to tell you about. We have developed a very specific program of a lot of what you heard me talk about today, called the Ketogenic Code for Peri and Postmenopause. It's an 8-week course that basically guides you from start to finish on all these concepts about if you're in peri or postmenopause and you have either been wanting or thinking about doing a ketogenic diet or been doing a ketogenic diet and are not having the success that you thought that you were going to have with weight loss and getting leaner and even hormonal balance. This is a particular program that is set up with the macros shift that I talked about that guides you how to eat in this way through this phase of life. So that's called the Ketogenic Code, and we have a website for that called ketogeniccode.com. So that's all the places that I play.
That sounds like an excellent program. I'm really glad you took the time to create something like that, because it sounds like a lot of people could benefit from it. And, you know, it's great that people can check that out. I really want to thank you for being here today with us. We'll have to have you back on again. Just, I know we could talk for days about all of these topics, but I really think that, you know, we got to really cover some great topics today. So thank you so much for being here today, Dr. Wrigley.
Thanks, Vanessa. You take care of yourself. And yeah, we will do this again soon.